Clerk of the House, any apologies for absence?
Sir, Senator Webby tendered his apology.
Okay. All right, if there are no apologies for absence, the minutes of the meeting. I mean, it was only last week, so I know that turning out these minutes can be a Clark, you want to guide me here? Can we, Miss Bailey? Okay, but it's just, Miss Bailey, are you there?
Chairman, perhaps you could defer the taking of the minutes.
Defer the
They're
minutes
not
and matters. And let's
immediately
move.
available. Yes.
Thank you, AG. Let us move straight into the presentations. Do we have the Chancellor Hall Committee here or the representatives?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the welcome to the Parliament. I'm sorry that we couldn't accommodate you in the halls of Parliament or in the houses of Parliament, but given the pandemic and the number of persons involved in these sessions, this is the most practical way of meeting. So, however, the meetings are just as substantive and meaningful. And again, I welcome you and ask you to make your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me take this opportunity to first introduce myself. My name is Cadel Green, and I'm the Hall Chairman for Chancellor Hall. This afternoon, I'm joined by Mr. Dominic Blair and Mr. Shaquille Holt, who are also contributors during the submission of this paper. Now, Chancellor Hall, for those who are not aware, we are a Hall residence on the University of the West Indies campus. We essentially are all-male hall, and from numbers, there are 176 of us who would normally exist on that space. When we had first written the submission in the earlier parts of 2020, I believe it was, essentially we saw within our space where a number of persons were voicing their concerns regarding customs, and there was some kind of anxiety regarding what would happen with a new bill and how it would affect the common person. So at that time, when we had our chairman, Mr. Sujay Boswell, we all discussed that the best way forward is if we as a youth could just analyze the bill, the act ourselves, and then make a submission on it. And that was what we did. Now, the entire tenet of our submission is really general. We didn't go clause by clause, but we did analyze it in what we could only say through a youth's perspective. And that is the basis of our presentation this afternoon. Now, through the revision of the act that we have seen, we must firstly commend the lawmakers on achieving a number of feats. The first of which is that we realize that it has facilitated a more efficient processing of customs-related transactions. And of that, we must give credit to what we can only assume would be the establishment of the customs system, which would have been an online platform, which of course, we saw again, which could lead to greater involvement of persons within our spaces, essentially as it relates to e-commerce and the ease of doing business with government agencies. In addition to that, we also saw where it was appropriate and also fitting, given the revision, that it also strengthened the enforcement powers of the Commissioner of Customs, and in doing so also encourage voluntary compliance with customs laws and procedures. We're also happy for the modern terminology used in the Act, the security, fluidity of procedures, and advanced arrival reports that we saw were worded well within the Act as well. Now, as it comes down to our recommendations, and really our recommendation may not be per clause, but what we do hope for, especially when we looked on the Part 2, subsection 3 and 4, we saw where the House of Representatives had a certain discretion in allowing for the reduction or the increase of duties related to certain items relating to customs. We here at Chancellor Hall looked at it through the perspective of a more of an inclusion, protection of small business and economies. That was a general theme that we were looking on with that idea. And the main premise of that was that we really are hoping that with the act like this, the tenants of government would be more lenient in some ways or form towards innovative business ideas, in addition to small businesses as well, which would largely want to be connected internationally for ease of doing business. And by that I mean, when we here on Hall consider the situation where a company created because of a need that has arisen over any time, we were hoping that through a bill like this, and especially that portion of the act, that government would be able to facilitate without a moment's notice certain changes that could enhance and enable us to participate in the process as much as we want, in the business process, that is. In addition to that, we also are quite thankful that we were able to join in this format, and also to present to you orally, as when we had written the paper submission, we only had written it at a time based on our understanding to really commend the efforts that we saw. And we are very much happy that you have included us a youth perspective in this leg of the discussion as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. Only last week, so I know that turning out these minutes can be a Okay, thank you, Mr. Green, for your presentation. You're accompanied by others from Chancellor Hall as well?
Yes, I am actually. Mr. Blair and Mr. Holt are online as well.
Okay, so welcome to Mr. Blair and Mr. Holt. And I want to applaud you for taking an interest into your country's affairs while still students at the university. Or, you know, democracy only works when we have engaged citizens, right? All of these procedures work when citizens are engaged and take part in the functioning of our democracy. So I want to commend you on your interest and for taking the time to write and then also to turn up here and make your presentation. I don't know if before I say anything, are there any comments on on the presentation itself that anybody wants to make? But if not, I know you're giving us sort of a philosophy and an outlook that customs that can encourage new business models, including e-commerce, and make business easier for small and micro enterprises. And indeed, that is the intention. Jamaica is dominated by small businesses in terms of number, but when processes are bureaucratic, it places an undue burden on small businesses who can't hire the administrative infrastructure to interface with complicated processes. So as much as it's possible, we want a rules-based system that is easy to decipher and to understand, that anybody can pick it up and read it. The regulations, the laws are clear and easy, and the procedures don't have a lot of redundancies in them, and they're easy to implement, allowing for small businesses to compete with large businesses. And the administrative burden that would otherwise be on small businesses, we alleviate through a streamlined set of processes. That is certainly our intent. With respect to the duties, that is not a remit of this committee. This committee is looking at the act itself on the legislation. But take your point and understand, bear in mind that the government of Jamaica has to raise revenues for administration, and the biggest sources at the moment are GCT and customs duty. Those are the two largest sources of revenue So we have to be, the approach that we take to adjustment in those areas has to be quite deliberate, because everything sort of rests on them and hangs on them, so to speak. However, I want you to assure you that your points fall on fertile ground, and we will sort of consider them as policy is formulated. And as far as this law is concerned, as we move into committee and into the clause by clause, we'll be mindful of the comments that you have made and of the need to ensure that these procedures are easy to implement. We don't want anything too complicated.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Chair.
No. Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to show my hand. I'm still.
Yeah, Member Hilton, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just first of all join in commending Mr. Green and his fellow students. His interest, as he stated, their interest, as he stated, is largely in e-commerce. You, Mr. Green, you are au fait, I believe, with what is called a last mile of the delivery logistics, aren't you? Are you not?
Yeah, yes, sir.
All right, and you would agree that that is one of the areas in which there is a lot of activities in the country, especially after the COVID virus set in among us. Now, would you say, and you asked that the custom facilitate this and other similar activities, particularly as it affects the MSME sector, but would you, I just wanted to know from your experience and what you've been seeing and experiencing, whether with the increasing number of participants in that space, do you see the need for any light touch, what I would call light touch regulation in the space? Because the free for all is one thing, but does that, and it makes the threshold for entry lower. But how do you see the increased investment in a sector that is growing without any regulation? And here I'm talking about light touch regulation.
Okay, sir. So while I was looking on it, and yes, I've seen the growth, especially last year, the numbers we would have heard in the recent debate of a number of persons who have started companies. That, of course, is just without regulation. And I'm of the belief that there are many more potential there waiting in the crevices and areas of Jamaica that could even start their own business and industries if they are just given that little nudge, regulatory nudge in that direction. So I'm not saying that it's not possible that we won't see deterrence, no, but with some lighter touch to the regulations, we may just see more. And the more we see is the better things may be on the economic side of things.
I hear you on that, and we'll talk some more on that, okay?
All right, Sir Hilton.
We'll finish, Chairman. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Chancellor Hall, for coming. And if you want, you can stick around and listen to the rest of the presentation. Totally up to you. You're welcome. Okay. Okay, we're going to move now to a presentation from Jamaica Lands. If you could just identify yourself and those from your team.
Thank you very much. I am Stephen Alexander Smith, Secretary of Policy Coordination at Jamaica Lands. Joining me is Jonathan Wilson. He's also part of the Policy Coordination Committee. So our submission is mostly based on, most of the content is from last year, but we've had meetings ever since, taking advantage of the extra time to discuss. And as a result, we have seven considerations. They're not very long. They're not very long, so I can go through them quickly. The first and I think most important one, I'd say, is to raise duty-free allowances for shipped goods. I understand that right now is not the best time to push things above 50 US dollars. The consideration itself, the text of the consideration, also has a provision for a default rate, the next consideration rather. So you can do either, we would be happy with either one. We'd be happy with an increase in duty-free allowances in the long term, or setting a flat or ad valorem duty. They both have the result of certain goods not having not having duties that distort the price of what consumers pay and what businesses pay for their goods, whether it be consumer goods, inputs for businesses, capital, things like that. Of the two, though, if it comes to choosing between them, the flat rate or a higher allowance, the rate is more important because the benefit of that, it cuts across the board. If you're importing something that costs $50 and the default rate is say 10%, you pay $5 duty on it. Whereas if the duty allowance gets raised to say 100 US dollars, things that cost 200 and so on, depending on what is on the tariff in a particular year, or if it falls on the common external tariff, what the common external tariff says, depending on that, you could still have a very large change in what duty is paid. And so for that reason, the flat rate is the most important. So that would be the first two considerations. The first is raising duty-free allowances for shipped goods, and or the second, setting a flat or default ad valorem duty. The third consideration is to maintain discounted rates for key firms and industries. So we believe that this would ease business for micro, small, medium enterprises, especially startup businesses, independent contractors, and workers in the creative industry. I think these individuals and these entities would benefit the most from this consideration. These are the kinds of businesses that are starting and growing fastest in this country, and they're the ones that are strapped for capital. They're strapped for cash, and so having discounted rates for these key industries, thinking especially in terms of these kinds of firms, MSMEs, startups, independent contractors, and creative workers, would be very beneficial to us. The fourth consideration is considering special duties for the purposes of energy efficiency. So depending on what kind of emissions, depending on what kind of consumption that certain goods may take, for example, cars, trucks, particular machines in industry, those rates, we are not opposed to having higher duties on goods like those, because we're the kind of country that fully internalizes the costs of environmental degradation, climate change. We can't export our problems to other countries, and so we are not opposed to something like this. On the one hand, higher duties for high consumption, high emissive goods. And on the other hand, as well, of course, considering lower duties for alternatives that reduce per capita consumption, reduce consumption and emissions in industry. This to us would also be useful to note. If you're familiar with our 2020 submission, the fifth consideration is new. It's not really anything that needs to be added to legislation per se. It's technically more policy than law, but we think this is something to keep in mind, that all legislatures can keep in mind. Our fifth consideration is to ensure enforcement of any duty calculation method. So we appreciate the 6-step method that exists right now in the second schedule. We appreciate that it takes into consideration the price that people actually pay, then the price that prevails, then the price for similar goods, and it allows customs officials to take advantage of conditions as they are when they meet every person who engages with customs. However, in our meetings and in discussions with people outside of our meetings and lands, we came to the conclusion that people didn't really trust customs because they felt the way they set duties, the way they determine how much something costs is inconsistent. And so we felt it necessary to add to our submission something to specifically reinforce this point. Trust in customs is important. It's the kind of thing that prevents people from smuggling things in, not declaring things that they need to declare. And so at the end of the day, everyone needs to know, people engaging customs officials, legislatures, everyone needs to know that any duty calculation method in a customs act will be enforced consistently across the board. The sixth consideration is just adjustments to the third schedule. We recognize the need for the schedule to sanction and deter violations of customs policy. However, it's entirely possible for those penalties to be so costly as to promote evasion and concealment rather than compliance. And if customs is to raise revenue, if customs is to prevent the uncontrolled outflow of foreign currency as one of many institutions in government, then having compliance is very important, as I mentioned before. So we noted that some large businesses may be able to absorb the fines that each penalty imposes, but without distinctions between consumers, micro, small, medium enterprises, and large enterprises, the third schedule as is, it may impose prohibitive risk to the least well-off persons importing goods. The fixed fines, in particular, of 5 million Jamaican dollars and 3 million Jamaican dollars possible for penalties against evasion of charges and restrictions, and for thwarting customs control. So 5 million for evasion and 3 million for thwarting, respectively. We in our meetings felt that was too prohibitive for consumers and small businesses. In these cases, we suggest fines based on the value of goods instead, rather than in addition to fixed fines like these. And we note that there are multiple instances in which the value of the duty is the most important factor. In fact, there's a multiplier of 3, so 3 times the duty. And we appreciate the value of those kinds of penalties, and that kind of has the same spirit of this exact suggestion. But we'd like to see 1 or 2 of those things across the board instead be the predominant form of penalty rather than having the fixed fines so high, especially so high in the millions of Jamaican dollars. Without addressing that, again, we understand the necessity for fines, but without addressing these concerns and other concerns in combination, persons engaging with customs may not be incentivized to declare all their goods. And even if they want to comply with the law fully, they may not import things that they could take advantage of, that could benefit their business, that could meet a need that they have here in the country that can't be met with goods sold here. And high penalties might just scare persons out of regular interactions generally. However, were earlier considerations met, particularly ones about raising allowances or setting a default rate and having consistent enforcement of duty calculation methods, the third schedule as is wouldn't be as problematic to us. It'll be okay. The seventh and last consideration is to just discuss this common external tariff with COTED. So we know that regularly the Council for Trade and Economic Development of CARICOM meets to, quote, authorize the reduction or suspension of the common external tariff in respect of imports, subject to such terms and conditions as it may decide. And we are also aware that we're not sure if the CET is under review right now, but we knew it was last year. Given that Jamaica is a member of CARICOM, we have to comply with the common external tariff, which forms a portion of the national tariff. Land suggests that the government use any avenues possible to call for alterations to the common external tariff in line with the above suggestions. This suggestion, it's not just for the proximate meeting, but any meetings in general. So just to wrap things up, give a summary. 1, raise duty-free allowances for shipped goods. 2, set a flat or default ad valorem duty. 3, maintain discounted rates for key firms and industries. 4, consider higher duties for more consumption-intensive goods, and lower duties for less consumption-intensive goods. 5, ensure enforcement of any duty calculation method. 6, consider adjustments to the third schedule, so penalties and fines. And 7, consult with COTED. That concludes our presentation of our suggestions, our submission. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for taking us in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your presentation and for following up on your 2020 presentation with, an addendum and more details. Quick sort of comments. The raise the threshold. I think I gave a response to that with the previous presentation, that this is not the forum for it. This is dealing with the law and the act. However, sort of heard your voice on it, and in certainly speaking as Minister of Finance in my budget presentation, I gave a response just saying that if we were to make such a move, now would not be the time, given the likely short-term impact of it. With respect to the differential, sorry, I'm wondering when you said default ad valorem, though, I wonder what you meant, because I mean a flat and an ad valorem are not the same thing. When you say set a flat or ad valorem duty, what you want to expound on that? You mean a flat in terms of dollar value? The duty is $5,000 regardless of the value?
That would be. Thank you for asking about that. To be clear, the words flat or default ad valorem, they actually account for both. They actually account for both scenarios. So flat would mean an actual number. Default ad valorem would mean a percentage. But as we had said, the ad valorem is more important. So just to be concrete, flat would be like 200, ad valorem would be like 10%. We noticed when looking at the tariff that a lot of goods had the same rate or similar rates. And so we thought it would make sense to have ad valorem across the board. Or rather a default rate, and then with exceptions.
Okay, as mentioned, this is not the forum for that, but accept your point nonetheless. One of the things with levels of duty is that if you have too much variation, it opens, and there has to be some variation, but it opens room for a lot of leakage, in that goods that are actually of one variety are labeled of a variety where the treatment is likely to be less. And sometimes it's difficult to distinguish, and things get by. And so in setting up, a duty regime, has to take into account collectability and creating an environment, as you rightly point out, where the incentive for escaping it is low. With respect to the point on differential rates by industry, I understand where you are coming from and what you are trying to achieve. And in certain cases, we have that. When the bauxite industry was starting up, for example, under the Bauxite Industry Encouragement Act, which dates back a couple of decades, the bauxite industry, because they're so dependent on fuel, for example, Jamaica would be uncompetitive if they had to pay some of those rates. And from then, decades ago, they were exempted from paying duties on certain items. So I'm just giving that as an example where it exists. However, there are a lot of drawbacks to having industry-specific duty rates. And the drawbacks are due to a number of factors, but I mentioned two. The first is similar to what was mentioned earlier, that it opens up the avenue for a lot of misrepresentation at the borders, that items that are under this scenario of differentiated rates by industry, items truly designated for one user is actually imported by another user, or represented to be imported by another user who can benefit from the lower rates. And the administrative burden that it introduces to ensure that that is not the case, right, imposes a cost and makes the functioning of the system even that more inefficient. So generally speaking, it's not a good idea, even though in a few instances it exists, in very specific instances, it's not a good idea because it has significant drawbacks, let me put it that way, because of the incentive it introduces for persons to unfairly benefit from that regime. Related to that, it's still on the topic of leakage, but the leakage will occur in other areas as well, where persons who benefit from the regime properly import material under that regime and then sell the surplus into the market, which distorts other industries. And indeed, we have had, over the time period that we've had that regime for the bauxite industry, there have been debates in Parliament about it, brought on, even in my time as Minister of Finance, brought on by the opposition, that that regime should be disbanded, because the allegation that was brought in that particular case, and I don't know it to be substantiated, but I'm just introducing it for the purposes of this, of illustrating, was that, you know, things that were being brought in, you know, the excess amounts were being sold to other industries or were being used in other industries, distorting the market and allowing people to underbid and distorting the competitive dynamics. So it's fraught with a lot of difficulties. And I just wanted to honor your time by taking the time to give you that response and to sort of explain some of the downsides of that to you. With respect to energy, if having, you know, lower rates of duty on energy efficient, you know, like electric vehicles and so on, that is something that the government is favorably disposed towards. Some more work needs to be done, because, you know, it's not without its impact, not without its effect, but you can take it that, you know, the government is favorably disposed towards that. Ensuring enforcement of duties as calculated. And again, that's outside of the realm of this committee. This committee does not consider items such as that. But again, I just want to honor your time by giving you a response. With respect to ensuring that enforcement of duties as calculated, I think under this Commissioner of Customs, I think you can have the assurance that she makes every effort to enforce duties as collected. And we hope to strengthen her hand with the bill here that is before us. With respect to adjustments to the third schedule, we can discuss that in committee when we get there. Even though your argument that high fines for not abiding by the customs rules can lead to persons not reporting properly, that's not what that's a little at variance with experience. I can see where if there are high fines and someone is caught, that it might dissuade them from, you know, confessing or from admitting. I can see that. But, you know, high fines, I would think, would encourage compliance rather than detract from compliance. But, you know, I know that when we get to committee, various members will have different views on the level of the fines. The fines as drafted are there to encourage compliance. The rules are being streamlined and made more simple. And in return, it is desired that the government gets its due on duties as they pass through the borders of Jamaica. But that's something that we can consider and determine during the committee stages. And then with respect to the common external tariff, I'm glad that you raised that. One of the things that needs to be understood is that the duty structure in Jamaica, indeed among Caribbean countries or CARICOM countries, is inextricably to the common external tariff and is influenced by deliberations of the requisite CARICOM committees. And in some cases, or in many cases, Jamaica is not at liberty to simply adjust duty rates. I know that you are encouraging for re-examination or a review of the common external tariff, and that's something we can consider and take up. Again, it's beyond the remit of this particular committee, but I thank you for raising it. Are there any other comments to Mr. Smith's presentation?
Chairman, I have my hand up. I just wanted to ask him, I'm not sure, others may know exactly who Jamaica Lands is, but could you just say a little bit who you are and how I'm looking at the submission and want to know how to view it from the perspective of your own experience. And then secondly, if you had any comments on the structure and operation of the legislation as you view it.
So thank you. Thank you for that question, for those two questions rather. Lands is an emerging grassroots movement that aims to build a network of political cadres and non-political community clubs to discuss current affairs, national problems, and the problems being faced by people and communities in order to come up with democratic solutions. So basically, Lands is organized internally as a network of units that regularly discuss law, policy, current affairs in the country and the region. And based on those discussions, we take a look at what's been discussed and we generate documents like submissions like these to Parliament, position papers, other media that we are successful putting online, but that we'd like to also disseminate offline to the people. And just to give, I guess, a bit of a demographic overview, we're mostly young, but we're welcome to anyone who is open to this kind of structure, to this kind of framework. And I'd say politically, we do skew to the left. That is something that must be acknowledged. As to your second question, I personally have nothing to add that hasn't been addressed in the submission itself. I am not at liberty to give much personal comment.
Okay. Over to you, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Smith, I want to thank you for your presentation and for taking the time to turn up today and to be available to elaborate on that presentation and to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we have a presentation now. And Mr. Smith, please, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the proceedings, totally at your choice. But please stay if you are able to. The Revenue Appeals Division.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members.
Afternoon.
Afternoon.
Okay, I am Delary Stable Chambers, Commissioner of the Revenue Appeals Division of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. And with me online is Monique Nelson, who is our Chief Legal Counsel. Are we clear to make our presentation now, Minister?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay.
And thank you for coming.
Okay. We deem it an honor to be invited to add to the discourse on the Customs Bill, and we thank you for the opportunity. I'm aware that our presentation today is expected to be ring-fenced by the written submission that was made in January of 2020. However, I'm going to ask you to indulge us to put our interest in the bill into context. So, an effective and efficient tax system is usually characterized by the level of compliance of taxpayers, in particular voluntary compliance. Enforced compliance is too costly to secure the efficiency levels to make taxation feasible. Therefore, it is wiser for tax administration to focus on influencing the desired compliance behavior as a decision of choice and not as a result of capitulation by means of enforcement. Tax compliance research is replete with evidence to indicate that taxpayers are more inclined to voluntarily comply when they trust the system to be fair and just. And fairness and justice in tax administration spans two areas. One is distributive justice, meaning each person in the society bears his fair share of the tax burden. And the second is procedural fairness, where the power and the authority of the tax administrator is justly and fairly applied in the use of balanced and transparent procedures that recognizes the right of the taxpayer to question certain actions or decisions. Respect for the rights of taxpayers is normally acknowledged through a mechanism for the resolution of tax disputes. And the gold standard for tax dispute resolution are described and promoted in several publications of international agencies such as the IMF, the OECD, and the WTO. Built into the tools used by the IMF to assess the health of a tax or customs administration is the prescription for the gold standard of the appeal mechanism. And such standard calls for a tiered mechanism to include an administrative process that is external to the tax administration as the second tier. And the third tier would be appeals to a higher court. The Jamaican tax system has met this gold standard. The Revenue Appeals Division, a division of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, is the second tier, providing an independent quasi-judicial appeal process to taxpayers who are aggrieved with a decision of any of the revenue commissioners recognized by the Revenue Administration Act. The Revenue Appeals Division, or the RAD, was established by statutes of the same name in 2015. It is the successor to the Taxpayer Appeals Department. Section 4 of the RAD Act 2015 prescribes that the principal function of the division is to facilitate the determination of appeals by taxpayers against the decision of a revenue commissioners regarding their tax liability under the revenue laws. Since its inception, the RAD has received over 60 appeals against decision of the Commission of Customs concerning issues relating to import tariff classification, exemptions and concession eligibility, customs valuation, and duty assessments. It is these experiences, Chairman, that has guided our comments on the draft bill and led to our submission in January of last year. Further, based on the contents of Clause 203 of the draft bill and discussions had with relevant customs personnel, it is our understanding that similar to the contents of the current Customs Act, the Customs Bill acknowledges and mentions the gold standard of tax appeals and affords taxpayers the right to appeal to the Revenue Appeals Division. In the bill, we are referred to as the Revenue Appeals Tribunal. And where dissatisfied with the decision of the Commissioner of the Revenue Appeals, the taxpayer will also be afforded a further right to appeal to the Revenue Court. The RAD has had extensive consultations with the Jamaica Customs Agency on the draft bill, and we made several recommendations which were adopted. Subsequent to those consultations, however, we recognize the need for the inclusion of a definition for the term manufacturer of goods in the bill to solve the mischief that usually attend disputes around eligibility for exemptions and concessions afforded to manufacturing entities under the customs rules. However, since our submission, we have recognized that the definition was included in the provisions of the first draft, Part 4, to the bill. And that being the case, the RAD is satisfied that the issue identified has been adequately addressed in the full presentation of the draft customs bill. And so as it relates to item 2 of our submission, my colleague Monique Nelson will make the relevant presentations. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, committee members, and other participants. Our submission, as contained in paragraph 2 of the relevant January 31, 2020 letter to the Clerk of the House, does not touch and concern the function or operation of the Revenue Appeals Division, RAD, in its dealing with the JCA, but was raised based on our own experience as it relates to the technical competence of some taxpayers and their representatives who will seek to use any lacuna in the relevant legislation to their advantage. And we were asked to review the bill in its entirety and provide comments. As indicated, we notice a possible frustrated status quo upon reading clauses 4.4 and 5.2 of the Customs Bill as is. Clause 4.4 of the bill indicates that an interim order made in relation to the increase or reduction of import or export duties or the imposition of new import or export duties shall expire within 21 days after the date within which it is required to be laid under Section 5.1, unless confirmed or amended under Section 5.3. Clause 5.1 of the bill indicates that the said interim order shall be laid 21 days after the publication of the order under Section 4.1. Clause 5.2 of the bill, however, indicates that a resolution to move to confirm, amend, or revoke the said order shall be made within the next 30 days on which the House of Representatives sits. What though, if the House moves on, say, the 22nd or 23rd day after the date on which the order is laid, but within the 30 days stated in Clause 5.2? Would this mean that the House would be moving on an expired order, or is it that the order is still in effect, being automatically extended? We stand guided if committee members share an interpretation similar to ours, or if we are misguided as to exactly how the clause is to be interpreted as intended by the drafters. Those are my submissions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Chambers. I mean, I think your presentation certainly speaks to the complexity of drafting and of concluding upon a bill such as the Customs Act. The customs in a country like Jamaica, where movement across borders in goods and in people, etc., represents over 80% of GDP, as compared to other countries where that amount is only 15 or 20. They're more self-sufficient internally. The Customs Act is, touches on every fabric of our society, and indeed, even within government, various departments and agencies will interact in different ways. I think that you've made some good points that I think we're going to have to consider in committee. I'm going to first ask the Commissioner or Ms. Hazel Edwards. Last point, clause 4.4 and 5.1, etc., and to any other points that you raise. You want to go, Ms. Edwards?
Thank you, Minister. Indeed, when we looked at the provision and the comments made by the RAD in relation to clause 4.4 and 5.2, we do acknowledge that perhaps some additional language and clarification would assist in making the meaning of the provision clearer. And so in that respect, we acknowledge those observations, and we certainly acknowledge the observations made by Commissioner Staple Chambers in terms of the relationship between customs and the RAD, particularly so far as it provides an opportunity for taxpayers who are aggrieved by decisions made by the Commissioner to be able to have those grievances fully ventilated before an independent body. And that is certainly, that's what occurs now, and that is the posture that has been taken in the legislation. And we want to be able to give taxpayers that opportunity as part of our mandate of ensuring that the commissioner remains accountable to taxpayers and that taxpayers have a full understanding of the reasons for the decisions that are made by the commissioner and an opportunity to challenge those decisions.
So during committee, you'll kind of having sort of conceded that we may need to look at this again during committee. We'll go into details. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, Minister, we have worked through what we think would be a revision.
Is a good workaround, a good response to the concerns expressed?
Yes, we have worked through that. We will no doubt discuss it in more detail with CPC before we present it officially, but we had worked through some suggested amendments.
Okay. All right, Ms. Chambers, does that sound like a good plan?
Yes, Minister. Are you taking any additional submissions?
We, you know, I had asked for some additional ones to be included if possible. We had the ones that were remaining were a number of individuals who mostly wrote in to speak about rates, like a few of the presentations earlier today, which is beyond the scope of the committee. But given that they took the time, I think we had extended an invitation to them. I'm not sure if any is here today, and you know, I have the disadvantage of not being able to just cast my eyes around the room and see. So I will need either Kamisha Bailey to confirm.
Sir, at the last meeting, we had agreed only to invite 3 entities, and those are the entities presented today. We didn't decide on whether individuals should be asked to appear before the committee. So I don't know if the committee now wants that to be done.
Minister.
Minister, my reason for asking is because we did not raise this in our discussions with the customs or consultations with the customs. Right. But there is I think that the customs find it very strenuous to manage the whole issue of customs valuation and to know when they have the right to reject a declared value. Now, the WTO in decision 6.1 created the opportunity for customs administration to determine when a value is unacceptable and to reject it and revalue the goods. We included the contents of decision 6.1 in the current Customs Act, which is section 19, which gives the commissioner the right to be satisfied as to the truth or accuracy of any declaration or information concerning valuation. But if we look at what some other jurisdictions have done, they have added a little more buffer for the commissioner or the customs administration to be able to firmly set aside the value without it being contentious. And so I'm thinking that since as we are replacing the Customs Act, it would be a good opportunity for us to revisit, which is now in the draft bill, clause 20, 3, which says nothing in the schedule shall be construed as restricting. I think we need to maybe expand that a bit, taking guidance from other jurisdictions in terms of how they have made it definitively clear that the commissioner has the right to set aside a value.
I thought I was raising my hand.
All right. So with that point that you mentioned, do we have a response to that, Ms. Edwards? Or you need some more time?
It's more a question so that I can, I mean, obviously we will have some detailed discussions with RAD so that we can fully understand the proposal. But I think it's more for me a question. Is it that there is some uncertainty as to the power of the commissioner to reject the value, or the question as to the process for doing that?
Right, so it's more of the power, because based on the language, it is something that we have grappled with over the years. From I was in the customs department, and now here at the revenue appeals, there are times when it is very difficult to determine whether the commissioner had the right to set aside the value, because there is nothing prescriptive in 19.2 right now, which is now 23 in the bill, that says she can set aside the value. Having not being satisfied as to the truth or accuracy, then she can set it aside. If you read it now, it's not very clear that she can do that, even though we know that's what decision 6.1 in the WTO agreement meant. So if you look at how other jurisdictions have incorporated the provisions of decision 6.1 from the WTO into their legislation, they made it elusively clear that the Customs Administration could set aside the value. Here we did not. We just bring over the text of decision 6.1 and did not wrap it up nicely to say the value can be set aside.
Commissioner, I wonder if, because I know that in the current, and without getting too much into the technicalities.
Right, I'm sorry to raise it here. That's why I was asking if you were taking additional submissions. I'm very sorry to raise it here and
No, it is fine, but I'm asking because we do have a provision in the current legislation, 19.8, that makes it clear that when it comes to value, we can make changes within 2 years. And a similar provision has been taken, and it indicates the basis on which we could do so within a 2 year.
Yes, no, that is clear, right? That is clear. That part is clear. Okay. What I'm gonna do is to send you some information I have, like from the legislation from other jurisdictions, which would show you the deficiency in ours.
Very well. I look forward to receiving it and having some more discussions so that we can clarify any difficulties.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Quick comment, Minister.
Go ahead, Member Hilton.
Quick comment. The topic that was just concluded on by the agencies, both customs and the RAD, is, as I think can be appreciated, a very, very important one, because to my mind, this is one of the areas of contention and likely appeals. And therefore, anything that we can do in this bill to if not settle but to attenuate that issue, I think I certainly am keen to ensure that is done, to bring clarity to the users, and more particularly to ensure that the appeals process itself is very clean and simplified. So it's a very important area, and I very much welcome the consultation between the two agencies to come to some agreed, settled language or approach to resolving the system.
I absolutely agreed. I was thinking the same, thinking similarly as Ms. Chambers was presenting and Ms. Edwards was responding. This is an area that we're definitely going to need to clarify. Okay, now we don't have any more presentations scheduled for this afternoon. There were a number of individuals who, when I say a number, probably 12 or thereabouts, who had made submissions. The submissions were all to do with, duty rates, etc., and duty threshold, and not to do with the deliberations of the committee or anything that the committee has sort of jurisdiction over. I would like, when the time permits, for us to invite maybe a few of them, but I wouldn't want to delay the proceedings that we actually have jurisdiction over by that. And the nature of getting individuals to come is that, unlike the sort of the organizations who we have represented today and last week, some of them may not necessarily want to and may not be available at the time. But what I propose to do is for us to move to the reviewing the matrix with a clause by clause, and we will invite up to four of the individuals, and at the appropriate time for meeting, at a time that they can make it, for the meeting to accommodate them, even if that is, we take a little break from the clause by clause and hear from these individuals. But I would propose that at this stage, we move to the clause by clause. If persons are not prepared for the clause by clause today, we could break and at our next meeting begin on the clause by clause.
Chairman, may I suggest respectfully that we commence the clause by clause at the next meeting, and we take an early break today.
Agreed. Supporting the position, Chairman.
Hello? I'm not, is it
Chairman.
mine? But I'm not hearing Member Malu Fort.
Okay, she made a very important point. You need to hear her. Malu, come in.
Member Hilton?
Yes.
Sorry, Chairman. I was indicating that having regard to the time, certainly I know there is another meeting that I have to attend, but perhaps we could take the break now and commence afresh the clause by clause examination at the next meeting.
And I was giving support to that, Chairman.
Okay. Now, I understand that you might have come here prepared to listen to presentations and to engage in that way, and the clause by clause requires a certain type of preparation. If that's the feeling of the committee, and at that point we could, the minutes of the meeting last week, I hope will be available, and we could take them then.
Sir, the meeting.
Yes, yeah, Kamisha?
Yes, sir. The minutes were circulated to all the members and the technical team.
So I stand corrected there.
Yes, and just one question. The individuals to be invited, would you want them to come at the next sitting on the 29th?
No, what we would do is, we want them to actually attend. So I don't want to just give a date. What I want to do is to find out what day, right? We're going to invite, say, 4 of them, what day the 4 of them can make it, what day of the days that we're meeting, which day they can make it, and then we'll invite them for that day. So if I may move back to an earlier point in the agenda, just to the confirmation of the minutes of April 8th, and they would have been sent out by you, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean,
yes, sir.
Hold a second. I them. Oh, right. Yeah, the minutes right here. You're right. Okay. I don't know if everyone, if you have your minutes in front of you, but the minutes were duly circulated. Apologies to Ms. Bailey. And I want to know if there are any amendments to the minutes. And I can just go page by page. I have them up, you know, on the opening page, page 2. Pages 3 and 4.